Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to MedHeads. Today we've got two very special guests. We've got Craig Payne, a group facilitator, and we've got Oscar Grano, a peer support worker. Welcome to you both. How are you both?
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Fergal.
Oscar, how are you?
Yeah, very
today?
well.
Good.
Yeah,
So
very good.
listen, Oscar, this is your first time on the show. I wanted to thank you for coming up to us today. What we were planning on doing today was talking about your lived experience. If you're happy to describe a little of what you went through in your journey, both into drug addiction and then into recovery. If you're happy
sure.
to talk to us about that. Yeah. So, and I suppose, Craig, that because of your great experience in helping people in this journey, it would be useful for you to highlight significant points in Oscar's story and relate them back to the discussions that we've had previously, if that's something that you could do for us, Craig.
Yeah, sure. Yep. Sounds good.
So Oscar, off you go. What happened to you? What was life like before you went into drugs? What were you doing? What was your life like first?
Well, the thing is, I grew up with both of my parents in and out of recovery from a very young age. So I grew up around a recovery environment, also an addiction environment, but more a recovery environment. And as a result of growing up in that environment and hearing all the stories and knowing about a lot of stuff that a lot of kids my age didn't know about, I was terrified of using drugs from a very young age. And fast forward to when I started high school, being very severely bullied, having very low self-esteem. The only people who accepted me and the only friend group that I really seemed to fit in with and the only people that I wanted to hang around with happened to be people that were using. And I just kind of slotted in there pretty comfortably. And then when I started using for the first time, it's kind of like this bubble burst. And this thing that I was so terrified of all my life, I was like, oh, what's the big deal? It's not such a big thing. And then, my addiction lasted about 5 years. And it was actually when I was 16 was the first time that I really tried to go and detox and change my life, because I'd reached a point where I felt like I was backed into a corner. And I just knew I couldn't do what I was doing anymore. And my dad was living in Hong Kong at the time. So I went over to Hong Kong to detox with him in his apartment in the 40-degree heat there, which was, it was an interesting experience to say the least. And at that point, what I believed was that I could come back home and that I could start using in a different way. I could, change the way that I was using the drugs I was using. There were certain drugs that I'd say I wouldn't use anymore. And I could change like the times that I use them and sort of try to control it in some kind of way. And it was after doing that a few times, there was a few times over a couple of years where I tried to go and detox and I'd come home and attempt to do that. And every time I'd end up in the same place, but worse than the time I was there before. So then when I was 18, I totally reframed it. That's when I actually, I've been clean since I was 18 now. And the way that I reframed it then is I realized that I couldn't get away with using any mood or mind altering substance without ending up in that place, no matter how or which way or what it was, it didn't matter. So it was when I reached that point that I reframed it and said, no, I don't need to not use this drug or not do that or not hang out with this person. I just need to get clean and that's it. And it was at that point where, and this is something that I've always been very grateful for, because I grew up in the recovery environment from a very young age. When I needed help, I knew where to go to get it. And my recovery has primarily been based in peer support groups and in a recovery community. And it was in that recovery community that when I got there, people were saying to me, if I knew that this place existed at your age, maybe I wouldn't have used for another 10 or 20 years, and I just heard a lot of people. Yeah, I heard a lot of people. Oh, yeah. Were you going to
So,
say something, Craig?
Craig,
No, this is that.
you've heard the story. Can you draw out some lessons from this story?
Well, I was just hearing, like I've heard where we've spoken about connection a bit, and I've heard in that story where connection has played parts in things all along the track, where not only we're getting involved in drugs in the first place, but and staying involved, but then also getting into recovery as well. And I feel like being exposed to that it sounds like it was really important to the recovery, Oscar, and help fast track things. Because I mean, at 18 to be going into recovery, that's huge, and to have stayed there is really good. So, have you found that connection's been important in that journey?
It's been the most important thing. Because when I did get into recovery, it was almost like my life became a blank canvas, and everything that built up my identity was essentially stripped away. That's how it felt. So I need to rebuild it. I needed to rebuild it. I needed new connections, and in that peer support community is where I found those new connections. And it was those connections with those people, going to support groups, going to get coffee afterwards, talking to people, getting phone numbers and linking in, that really got me through those early days of recovery and gave me the ability to thread the days together and for my head to hit the pillow at the end of the day. And it's another day when I haven't picked up. And if I didn't have that community and that connection to fill those days in, I don't know how long I would have made it. And if I did make it, I would have just gone crazy, I think.
And you mentioned identity in there as well. Did you find was it a recreation of identity, or just reestablishing yourself again?
Well, I didn't really know who I was, so it was just about living with an open mind and living in a place where I was open to learning about what do I like, what don't I like, who am I once all the substances are taken away, who is Oscar? Because I didn't know, because my entire identity was defined by substance use.
And is that something you feel like you've got a grasp on now, and like you could say who Oscar is, or is that something that is evolving as you go in recovery as well?
Well, look, I've definitely got a solid foundation of who I am today. Having been in recovery for over 11 years now, but within that, I still find that it's essential to maintain an open mind, because whenever I have an absolute concrete idea about who I am, or about something, about the way the world is or someone else, more often than not, it kind of gets challenged or shattered, or I'm kind of constantly in a position where just the way that I'm living, it's like I'm forced to maintain an open mind, and that's totally being in recovery is what taught me how to live like that.
Oscar, can I ask you? You said at the very beginning of your story that you felt that you didn't fit in when you were at school. When you started using at 16, and you identified with a group of people who were using drugs, and you didn't fit in with the group that wasn't using drugs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And Craig, I wonder if you'd then comment on that.
Yeah, sure. So, I was very overweight as a child, and I was fairly brutally bullied throughout the final years of primary school and the first couple of years of high school. The people that I gravitated towards and who wanted to spend time with me and who weren't bullying me were this small group of people who were using drugs, and it wasn't the drugs that attracted me to them. It was that they accepted me when they met me. Yeah.
What do you think about that,
And
Craig?
then they just so happened to be using drugs, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's a really familiar story, and it's one I hear a lot, is that lack of fitting in, and that lack of not belonging anywhere, and a real feeling of not belonging. Yeah, and then once it's found, there's almost a relief that comes with that, and I wonder sometimes if it's as you said, there's that connection there, but did the drugs provide some relief as well, Oscar, or was it that you associated with?
oh, absolutely. I remember the first time I used, it was like this sense of like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. This is the solution to coping with life. It was like everything just kind of washed away, and I just thought, why didn't I start doing this sooner? Why isn't everybody everywhere doing this? You know? Yeah. And then within a few years, it had completely reversed and it had completely stopped working. And it was just complete misery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Craig, can you comment on that? This idea of impulsivity to compulsivity.
So, well, it's in what sense? Yeah.
So the initial drive to use a drug is all about impulsivity. It's fabulous, and then then the perpetuation of drug use is about the avoidance of withdrawal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the longer you use, the more the tolerance builds up, and the less it starts to do what you're setting it, what you're using it for. And for in so many cases, that being the relief from the situation, and to almost block out the noise of the outside world, and block out all the things that are going on, because the inability to deal with the problems is what generates that cause for looking for the external relief. So
Yeah.
that thing that initially, as Oscar said, that thing that initially made him feel great and was really good, it eventually starts to chew away, and all the problems still exist, and in a lot of ways the problems build up over that time as well. Like it starts to have the physical and emotional, and like just drain energies, and has all the negative effects on life, and it no longer provides the relief that it was providing in that first place, and those problems are still left. So I wonder how you then started to deal with all the other things in life, Oscar, that were driving you to want to use.
Well, look, it was really essential for me to keep it simple in early recovery. I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I didn't have to work for a while. And I had the luxury of being able to really strip my life back and just essentially focus on doing recovery. And it was basically allowing myself that space for the first year and a half to 2 years of recovery, where I didn't do much else other than recovery. And then within that, the wildly unpredictable mental and emotional journey that early recovery is, having that space definitely made it much easier to get through it, because I was just around that peer support group and that recovery community day in, day out. So whatever I was going through, it was essentially like I was never alone to face that difficult stuff. There were always people around me who were there to help.
Oscar, did you ever go through the yeah buts? Talk to me about your denial and final acceptance of your issue, because I know that Craig and I have discussed at length the yeah buts and acceptance and denial. How did that play with you?
Before this recovery, yeah, it was absolutely there. Um, it was, yeah, it was, but I think it was more, before this time, um, there were moments where the reality would hit for a brief moment, and I'd go, I don't think I can keep doing this. But I wasn't prepared to accept that yet. So I'd just spin whatever a story I had to get away with it in the moment and to convince myself that it was okay in the moment. And that could show that could be done in a myriad of ways, you know.
Such as?
Oh, well, you know, all right, I won't start. If I don't start using before, say 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I only use this much before I go to sleep to make sure that I have this much left for tomorrow, then it's fine and it's not a problem. You know, and just little justifications like that, little illusions of control, until and also even getting away with that for little periods of time, the amount of energy and stress and focus that it took to even achieve those brief moments of control. Even if I could have kept that going, it was no way to live, you know. Yeah. I mean,
Craig,
I was just totally incapable of that in the end anyway.
does that ring true, Craig,
Yeah.
in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken about the denial and the acceptance again, and also like the full-time job side of things, where it just takes up so much mental space on a daily basis that it's just really draining. And I was interested there, Oscar. You know, you said it's almost that denial, that illusion that you were trying to keep up for yourself, that you were in control of that, and it's that denial that keeps us trapped for so long. And then there's that acknowledgement that things are a problem, but then the different level where there's an acceptance that there's a problem there. Where was it that you came to real acceptance in the problem and moved forward with things?
Well, it was really the last 2 weeks of my using, because I decided that I wanted to go to detox again, and somehow I just knew that it was different, but I wasn't able to actually get out of my living situation for 2 weeks. And for that final 2 weeks, it was really, for me, it was the definition of using against my will, because it was just, there was no enjoyment left in it anymore. It was just day in, day out, I'm doing this because I have to do it to physically function. And there is just nothing left in it. And it was going through those 2 weeks that really cemented it, you know. And I think having gone through those 2 weeks, that made it so much easier when I did get to detox, because it was just this huge wave of relief after that 2 weeks. Like, I don't have to do it anymore.
Oscar, I like those phrases. You said using against my will, which I think is actually the definition of addiction. And also, you've also mentioned the illusion of control. I really like those two things. And I think, Craig, you've commented on that as well. Craig, what do you think about using against my will?
Yeah, I think it becomes a big part of recovery, and it becomes a big part of that drive. And there's an old saying, you know, I'm sick or tired of being sick and tired. And it just, you know, that drain to keep using. And yeah, I'm interested that there's a pain that goes along with that, and there's a real anguish that goes with that. And eventually what I hear so often is, I did this for me, you know, and it became, people sort of get into recovery or try and stop using for other people, but all of a sudden there's this switch, and it's a real internal drive that does that. And that's what I just said, you heard from Oscar, was, you know, like that almost that pain of going through that for that last 2 weeks was the one that says, I just don't want to ever go back to this, and gives that real motivation to keep going.
So, Oscar, how many detoxes had you done previously before this final detox?
3. So
and were
it was
these
4 in
formal
total.
residential?
No. See, my dad would always He lived in Hong Kong for a couple of years. I was living in Byron at the time, and then he moved down to Melbourne. He'd move around a lot for work, and I was living with my mum, and I'd just go and stay with him wherever he was, to go and detox for the couple of weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, and he knew that that's what you were going through, yeah?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Because like I said, my parents were in recovery as well. And,
yeah. So here's a question for you. I mean, a lot of people, I think, go through this phase of thinking the illusion of control. They think they can control it. And then when they can't control it, then they think they can do their own detox. Or then they can do a kind of a family-supported detox. But that didn't work for you, did it?
Well, in the end, it was, the substances that I was using, there was no like medical risk involved in detoxing off those substances medically unassisted. It was just having to go through the discomfort of it.
Yeah.
So, and that was fine for me. But I'm very aware that for many, many people that's definitely not the case. And I think that it's more often than not the case from what I've seen. Yeah.
But you went through 3 family-supported detoxes, which didn't work. Why do you think that was?
I think it's just because of where I was at. I mean, I think that with any of those detoxes, no matter where I did it, I wasn't ready. I was still,
Yeah.
trying to convince myself that I was going to go and give it another red hot go,
Yeah. You see, this is an interesting point.
Yeah.
I think, now this is just an idea, and I'd be interested in Craig's opinion on this as well. I think that people who are in the phase of thinking that they can do a family-supported detox just aren't ready. I think that is a symptom of a lack of true acceptance of the pit that they're in. Am I being too harsh, or Craig, do you think there's any wisdom in that?
I think for different people, depending on how long, how deep, how much support they've got around, detox with family can work. It's what happens after that, after the detox.
The aftercare.
The aftercare. But more important, the focus on recovery for that person. So, and this is what we've talked about a bit. Like just taking the substance away doesn't change the patterns of behavior. And so it's that work in recovery that needs to be done. And I've heard Oscar mention, the work he's done in recovery, and that this just keeps going. And so, and it sounds like with the support of Oscar's family, it was really important to his recovery. But yeah, so I think, look, detox is definitely to be around a supportive environment is great. But depending on the depth of the addiction and the length, then a detox is probably needed. But I think it can be done with family. But what focus do you put on recovery after that, and how much does recovery become part of your lifestyle?
Because without recovery, without the work afterwards, you're back into the same mess. So detox opens the door, but the journey to recovery is actually the recovery itself. That ongoing commitment to day, hour by hour, day by day, week by week, abstinence and filling your life with meaningful and purposeful activities. That's the key, isn't it? It's not just the 2 weeks of discomfort.
It is, and it's changing your attitude to life and changing your behaviors and how you handle things. Because until you start to change that, your instant go-to is always going to be to turn to the substance to provide the relief that it's supposed to provide for you.
Oscar, what was your story in that regard? What purposeful, meaningful activities did you fill your life with after your detox?
For me, a big one was music, because I'd always written music from a very young age. And I remember I got into recovery. I got a job at Subway, and I was able to save up a little bit of money and buy a little recording setup so I could start recording music properly at home. And I went on to study audio engineering. And yeah, I had the freedom to really follow that passion in early recovery, which was great.
What was it like for you doing your first paid employment after your recovery, after your detox?
It was like a novelty, really. I remember being in a place where people were just, just basic trust of manning the till and like being around the money and closing the shop and little things like that, where the fact that I was receiving that kind of trust from the greater society, that's what helped me see the change within myself, and that's what helped me see that, hey, I'm just, I'm a trustworthy person now. I can do this stuff now, and the novelty of having disposable income that wasn't gone before I got it on a debt or on the next drug was an incredible sense of freedom as well. That I remember when I sat down for the first time, just at a nice cafe and bought myself a meal. And it was this huge, like, oh my God, I can sit down and afford to buy myself a meal at a cafe. This is incredible,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your first day of work like? Can you still remember it? I mean, what I'm trying to get at, did you feel that you were ready for it, or was there any anxiety?
No, there wasn't really.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't in a position where it was crucial for me to find a job. So the stakes weren't very high really. It was more just like going and giving it a go.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Craig, for a lot of people, that first day of employment is a huge milestone that is so anxiety provoking, and people dip their toe in the water and then they fail, and then they crash, and then the low self-esteem kicks in. I think it's great to hear Oscar's story of success, but that's not the story for everyone, is it?
Not always,
Yeah.
and that comes down again to what's driving those feelings of anxiety, and what's driving those fears about going back to work. But for as you say, a lot of people getting back to it and getting that structure and routine in life is really important.
Yeah. Oscar, what about repairing of relationships? Because we haven't really talked about your loss of relationships, but I think Craig and I have talked previously many times about how the descent into addiction is actually characterized by a loss of relationships, and recovery is characterized by repair of relationships and forming new relationships. Did that happen to you, and how important are relationships in your ongoing recovery?
Yeah, absolutely. They're the most important thing, really. And I remember the process that I went through of behavioral change. A big part of it was making amends to the people who I'd harmed, and I've still got friends today who knew me throughout my entire addiction, and who are still some of my closest friends today. And then, of course, my family, and even some ex-partners from in my addiction and stuff like that. And when I got to the point where I was ready to start making amends to people, almost everyone I spoke to essentially said that, hey, it's water under the bridge, because I'd been in recovery for a few years at the time. So just through me living in recovery, it was like a living amends had been made, and just me being in their lives and in recovery, it was just like that it was just a complete non-issue anymore, and they weren't hanging on to any of that stuff. And I found that process incredibly healing and incredibly relieving.
Was it frightening for you to consider a repair of relationship at first?
There was a few in there that I was definitely anxious going into those conversations and bringing
Yeah.
that stuff up again. Yeah.
Who was that, if I may ask?
One was an ex-partner. One was my dad. And those are the two that I can really think of. Because with my dad, I remember when I was 4 months clean and I visited him in Melbourne when I was living in Byron at the time. It was the first time that I'd seen him in 5 years where I hadn't either been using or detoxing, because I'd always go and stay at his house to detox, and that's almost the only time I'd see him.
So that was a big step for you.
Yeah.
So Oscar,
Yeah, absolutely.
We've run out of time, so I'm going to ask you both for one message of hope for anyone listening. So Oscar, you first. If you could say one thing to anyone listening to us, what message of hope would you want to give out?
Message of hope. Well, just that recovery is possible. You know, there's nothing magical or mystical about me or anybody else who has managed to get ongoing recovery and who've managed to build really meaningful lives, you know, and you just have to do it. You know, it's like if you can find a way for your head to hit the pillow tonight and you haven't picked up, then it's been a successful day no matter what else happens. And whatever you do to achieve that, you know, I don't think it matters, you know. Yeah.
Great. And Craig, what about you? One final message of hope.
Yeah, again, like Oscar said, recovery is possible, but you can't do it alone. And what I heard through a lot of his story was the supports that have been around for him, and the supports that are ongoing now he's in recovery as well, and just how important they've been. So don't try and do it alone.
Craig and Oscar, thank you so much for your pearls of wisdom. I really hope we can do this again soon. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, you, Fergal.
Thanks, Oscar.
Thanks, Craig.
That's it for today's MedHeads. Thank you for watching. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong. We'll see you next time.